The night was cold, and the wind was blowing hard when James got the phone call. He was sitting alone in his small apartment, eating instant noodles and watching an old movie on television. The phone rang 3 times before he picked it up. It was his friend Kevin from work. "James, you have to come out tonight," Kevin said. His voice was loud and excited. "There is a big party at my cousin's house. Everyone is going to be there. You cannot miss this one." James looked around his apartment. The walls were bare. The furniture was old. A layer of dust covered most things because he never had the energy to clean properly. This place had become his hiding spot from the world. He spent most of his free time here, alone with his thoughts and his regrets. "I don't know, Kevin," James said slowly. "I am really tired tonight. Maybe next time." "You always say next time," Kevin replied. "Next time never comes with you. Come on, man. When was the last time you went out and had some fun? You work, you go home, you sleep. That is not a life. That is just existing." James knew Kevin was right. He could not remember the last time he did something fun. The days all felt the same to him. Wake up, go to work, come home, sleep. Over and over again. The same boring routine that made him feel like a ghost walking through his own life. "Fine," James finally said. "I will come for 1 hour. Just 1 hour." Kevin cheered on the other end of the phone. "That is what I wanted to hear. I will pick you up in 30 minutes. Wear something nice for once." After Kevin hung up, James sat there for a moment. He felt nervous. Social situations had become difficult for him over the years. He was not always like this. There was a time when he was full of life, full of dreams, full of music. But that was a long time ago. That was before everything changed. James got up and walked to his closet. He pushed aside the old shirts and pants until he found something decent to wear. A simple black shirt and dark jeans. Nothing special, but it would do. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at him. His eyes looked tired. His face looked older than his 30 years. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped taking care of himself. Kevin arrived exactly 30 minutes later, honking his horn loudly from the street below. James grabbed his jacket and headed out. The cold air hit his face as soon as he stepped outside. It felt strange to be going somewhere on a Friday night. For the past 8 years, his Friday nights had all been the same. Alone, quiet, safe from any reminders of his past. Kevin's car was warm inside. Music was playing on the radio, some popular song that James did not recognize. Kevin smiled at him as he got in. "Look at you, actually leaving your cave," Kevin joked. "I am proud of you, my friend. Don't make a big deal out of it," James said quietly. "I am just coming for a little while." They drove through the city streets. The lights from the shops and restaurants created a colorful blur outside the window. People were walking on the sidewalks, laughing, talking, living their lives. James watched them and wondered how they did it. How did they make everything look so easy? "So tell me about this party," James said, trying to make conversation. "My cousin Sarah throws this party every year," Kevin explained. "She has this huge house in the nice part of town. Lots of people come. Good food, good drinks, good music. You are going to love it." James nodded but said nothing. He was already thinking about how quickly he could leave without being rude. 1 hour. He promised 1 hour. And then he could go back to his quiet apartment and his instant noodles and his old movies. They arrived at the house 20 minutes later. Kevin was not lying when he said it was huge. The house was 3 stories tall with big windows that glowed with warm light from inside. Cars were parked all along the street. James could hear music and laughter coming from inside even before they reached the front door. "Ready?" Kevin asked. "Not really," James admitted. Kevin laughed and patted him on the back. You will be fine. Just try to relax and enjoy yourself for once." They walked inside, and James was immediately overwhelmed. There were people everywhere. In the living room, in the kitchen, on the stairs. Everyone was talking and laughing and drinking. The music was loud, some kind of electronic dance music that made the floor vibrate under his feet. James stayed close to Kevin at first, following him like a shadow as he greeted friends and introduced James to people. Names and faces blurred together. James shook hands and said hello, but he knew he would not remember anyone by the end of the night. He was too busy looking for a quiet corner where he could hide. That is when he saw it. In the corner of the large living room, pushed against the wall like an afterthought, there was an old, upright piano. It was covered in dust, and someone had placed empty cups on top of it. Nobody was paying any attention to it. To everyone else at the party, it was just another piece of furniture. But to James, it was so much more. His heart started beating faster. His hands felt sweaty. He had not seen a piano up close in 8 years. He had avoided them on purpose. Every time he walked past a music store, he would cross to the other side of the street. Every time he heard piano music on television, he would change the channel. The piano was connected to a part of his life that he had tried very hard to forget. James found a spot near the wall where he could stand alone. He held a drink in his hand but did not drink it. His eyes kept going back to the piano. It was like a magnet pulling at something deep inside him. Something he thought he had buried a long time ago. Kevin came over after a while. "Why are you standing here alone? Come meet some people." "I'm okay here," James said. "You go ahead. I just need a minute." Kevin looked at him with concern but did not push. "Okay, but don't just stand here all night like a statue. This is supposed to be fun, remember?" James nodded, but he was not listening anymore. His mind was somewhere else, somewhere in the past. He was thinking about who he used to be. He was thinking about the dreams he once had. And he was thinking about the dusty piano in the corner, sitting there like a ghost from his old life, waiting for him to finally face what he had been running from all these years. None of the people at the party knew about James and his past. To them, he was just Kevin's quiet friend from work, the boring guy who never talked much and always ate lunch alone. They did not know that there was once a time when James was one of the most promising young piano players in the entire state. They did not know about the competitions he had won, the teachers who had called him gifted, or the dreams he had carried with him since he was just a small boy. James started playing piano when he was 5 years old. His mother had an old piano in their small house, and one day, little James walked up to it and started pressing the keys. At first, it was just noise, random sounds that made his mother laugh. But then something strange happened. James started finding patterns. He started creating melodies. His tiny fingers moved across the keys, like they already knew what to do. His mother noticed right away that her son was different. She saved money from her job as a waitress to pay for piano lessons. Every week, she would take James to his teacher's house across town. She would sit in the corner and watch as her son learned to read music, learn to understand rhythm, learn to turn simple notes into beautiful songs. By the time James was 10 years old, he was playing pieces that most adults could not play. His teacher told his mother that James had a rare gift. He did not just play music. He felt it. When his fingers touched the keys, it was like his soul was speaking through the instrument. People who heard him play would get emotional. Some would cry. Some would just sit there in silence, unable to believe that such beautiful sounds were coming from such a young boy. James grew up knowing that piano was his destiny. He practiced for hours every day, sometimes forgetting to eat or sleep. When other kids were playing video games or watching television, James was in front of the piano. His fingers would hurt. His back would ache from sitting so long. But he did not care. The piano was his whole world. In high school, James won every competition he entered. Colleges started sending him letters, offering him scholarships. Music schools wanted him. Everyone said he had a bright future ahead of him. James believed them. He believed that one day he would play on the biggest stages in the world. He believed that his name would be known everywhere. His biggest dream was to study at Juilliard, the most famous music school in America. Only the best of the best got accepted there. James prepared for years for his audition. He practiced until his fingers bled. He memorized the most difficult pieces. He was ready. He knew he was ready. The day of the audition came when James was 22 years old. He traveled to New York City with his mother. She had used all her savings to buy the plane tickets. James could see how proud she was. He could see the hope in her eyes. He promised himself that he would not let her down. The audition room was cold and empty. There were 3 judges sitting behind a long table. They did not smile. They did not say anything encouraging. They just watched with blank faces as James walked to the piano. James sat down and placed his fingers on the keys. For a moment, everything felt right. He started playing the piece he had prepared, a complicated sonata that showed off all his skills. But then something happened. Halfway through the piece, his mind went blank. His fingers stopped moving. He forgot what came next. The silence in the room was terrible. James could hear his own heart beating. He tried to start again, but his hands were shaking too much. The music that had always flowed so easily from him was gone. It was like someone had turned off a light inside him. The judges waited for 10 seconds that felt like 10 years. Then one of them, an old man with gray hair and cold eyes, spoke up. "That is enough," the old man said. "You may stop." James looked up at him. "Please, sir, let me try again. I know this piece. I have played it 1,000 times." The old man shook his head slowly. "Young man, I have been teaching music for 40 years. I have seen many talented students come through these doors. But talent alone is not enough. You lack the mental strength needed to perform at this level. If you cannot handle the pressure of an audition, how will you handle a concert hall full of thousands of people?" The words hit James like punches to his stomach. He wanted to argue. He wanted to explain that this was just one bad moment. But the old man was already looking at his papers, moving on to the next candidate. "We will contact you with our decision," another judge said. "Thank you for coming." James walked out of that room a different person. The rejection letter came 2 weeks later, but he already knew what it would say. He did not even open it. His mother tried to comfort him, but there was nothing she could say. The dream he had worked toward his entire life was gone. Just like that. After that day, James could not play piano anymore. Every time he tried, he would hear the old judge's voice in his head. "You lack the mental strength." The words played over and over like a song he could not stop. His fingers would freeze above the keys. His mind would go blank. The joy he once felt when playing music was replaced by fear and shame. His mother begged him not to give up. "James, one rejection does not mean anything. There are other schools, other opportunities. You cannot let one man destroy your dream." But James did not listen. He was too broken. He sold his piano 2 months after the audition. He got a boring office job and moved to a new city where nobody knew about his past. He stopped talking about music. He stopped listening to music. He tried to become a completely new person, one who had never dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. 8 years passed. 8 years of silence. 8 years of pretending that the music inside him had died. James convinced himself that he was happy with his quiet life. He convinced himself that the piano was just a chapter in a story that was over now. But standing in that crowded party, looking at the dusty old piano in the corner, James realized something. The music had not died. It was still there, buried deep inside him, waiting. And no matter how hard he tried to run from it, a part of him would always be that little boy sitting at his mother's piano, making beautiful sounds with his tiny fingers. The question was, after all these years, did he still have the courage to play? The party was getting louder as the night went on. More people arrived. The music got louder. The conversations got louder. Everyone seemed to be having a wonderful time, except for James, who was still standing near the wall, holding his drink and trying to be invisible. He had been watching the piano for over an hour now. Nobody had touched it yet. It just sat there in the corner, forgotten and covered in dust. Sometimes people would put their drinks on top of it or lean against it while talking. To them, it was just furniture. James wanted to go over there and tell them to be more careful. But that would mean admitting that he cared about pianos. That would mean opening a door he had kept closed for 8 years. Around midnight, something changed. A young woman with blonde hair and bright red lipstick started walking toward the piano. She was clearly drunk. Her steps were unsteady, and she was laughing at something nobody else could understand. James watched her with a growing sense of worry. The woman's name was Lisa. She was a friend of Sarah's from college, and she was known at parties for doing silly things after a few drinks. Tonight, she had decided that she wanted to play the piano. Lisa sat down on the piano bench with a dramatic flourish. She looked around the room to make sure people were watching her. A few of her friends cheered and clapped. Lisa smiled and turned back to the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys and started pressing them randomly. The sounds that came out were terrible. It was not music. It was just noise. She banged on the keys harder and harder, laughing the whole time. Her friends were laughing too, taking videos on their phones. James felt something twist inside his stomach. It was not jealousy. It was something closer to pain. The piano was being treated like a toy, like a joke. Nobody understood what they were doing. Nobody understood the beauty that instrument was capable of creating. Lisa tried to play a simple song that every child learns. It was awful. She kept hitting the wrong notes and giggling when she made mistakes. The people around her were encouraging her, cheering her on like she was actually doing something good. "Come on, Lisa," someone shouted. "Play us something real." Lisa shrugged and spread her hands. "I don't know how to play. I'm just having fun." "Then someone else should play," another person said. "There has to be someone here who actually knows how to play piano." The room started looking around. People glanced at their friends, trying to find someone who might have hidden musical talent. The attention shifted from Lisa to the crowd. Faces turned left and right, searching Dot, and then Lisa's eyes found James. She was staring right at him, her head tilted to one side like she was trying to figure something out. James's heart started beating faster. He tried to look away, tried to blend into the wall behind him. But it was too late. "You," Lisa said, pointing directly at James. "You look like someone who plays piano." Everyone in the room turned to look at James. 50 faces, maybe more, all staring at him. He could feel their eyes on him like spotlights. His face grew hot. His hands started shaking. "Me?" James said, his voice coming out weaker than he wanted. No, I don't play." Lisa stood up from the bench and started walking toward him. Her steps were wobbly, but her eyes were focused on him like a hunter looking at prey. "I can tell," she said. "You've been looking at that piano all night. I saw you. You keep looking at it like it's your old girlfriend or something." Some people in the crowd laughed at that. James felt his face grow even hotter. Had he been that obvious? He thought he was being careful. "I'm serious," James said, holding up his hands. "I can't play. I never learned." But Lisa was not giving up. She grabbed his arm and started pulling him toward the piano. James resisted, but people were gathering around them now, creating a wall that was hard to push through. "Come on," Lisa said. "Just one song. It doesn't have to be perfect. This party needs some real music. Play, play, play." The crowd started chanting. It started with just a few voices, but it grew quickly. Soon, dozens of people were chanting, their voices filling the room. They were smiling, thinking this was all in good fun. They did not know what they were asking of him. Kevin pushed through the crowd and appeared next to James. His face was confused. "James, do you actually know how to play piano? You never told me that." James looked at his friend, his only friend. He did not know what to say. 8 years of hiding, and now everything was falling apart because of a drunk woman at a party. "I used to play," James said quietly. "A long time ago." Kevin's eyes went wide. "What? Are you serious? Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I don't play anymore," James said through tight lips. "That part of my life is over." But Kevin did not understand. He was too excited by this new information about his quiet friend. "Come on, man. Just show us what you can do. It doesn't have to be anything big. Just a few minutes." The crowd was still chanting. Lisa was still pulling his arm. Kevin was looking at him with expecting eyes. James felt trapped. The walls were closing in on him. He could barely breathe. He looked at the piano sitting there in the corner. It seemed so small and harmless. Just wood and metal and strings. Just an object. But to James, it was so much more than that. It was a doorway to his past. A doorway to all the pain and disappointment he had spent 8 years trying to forget. "Please," he whispered, but nobody heard him over the chanting. "Please, just let me go." But the crowd did not let him go. They kept pushing, kept cheering, kept expecting something from him. James stood there, frozen, feeling like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. One step forward would change everything. One step back would mean running away again. 8 years of running. 8 years of hiding. And now, here he was, surrounded by strangers who wanted him to face the thing he feared most. The piano waited silently in the corner, its keys dusty but ready. Ready for someone to bring them back to life. Ready for someone to fill the room with music. The question was simple. Would James take that step forward? Or would he spend the rest of his life wondering what might have happened if he had just been brave enough to try? The chanting grew louder. "Play! Play! Play!" The voices merged into one big sound that filled the entire room. James felt like he was drowning in noise. His chest was tight. His hands were cold and wet with sweat. Every part of his body was telling him to run away. But something strange was also happening. Somewhere deep inside him, a small voice was speaking. It was quiet at first, almost impossible to hear under all the fear and doubt. But it was there, and it was saying something unexpected. Maybe it's time. James pushed that thought away. No, he could not play. Not here, not now, not after everything that had happened. What if he failed again? What if his fingers froze like they did at the audition? What if everyone laughed at him? "I really can't," James said again, pulling his arm away from Lisa. "I'm sorry. Please find someone else." Lisa made a face like a disappointed child. "But you said you used to play. That means you know how. Just play one little song, please." Kevin stepped closer to James. He could see that something was wrong with his friend. James did not look nervous like a shy person who did not want attention. He looked scared, truly scared, like someone facing their worst nightmare. "Hey," Kevin said softly. "Are you okay? What's going on?" James did not know how to explain it. How could he tell Kevin about the audition? About the judge's cruel words? About the years of pain and regret? These were things he had never told anyone. They were buried so deep inside him that he had almost forgotten they were there. "It's complicated," James whispered. "Just help me get out of here." Kevin nodded slowly. He turned to the crowd and raised his hands. "Okay, everyone. Show's over. My friend doesn't want to play. Let's respect that and move on." Some people in the crowd groaned in disappointment. Others shrugged and went back to their conversations. The chanting died down, and the normal party noise returned. Lisa wandered off to find more drinks, already forgetting about James and the piano. But James could not forget. He was still standing there, looking at the piano across the room. His heart was still beating fast. His mind was still racing with memories. Kevin handed him a glass of water. "Here, drink this. You look like you've seen a ghost." James took the water and drank it slowly. "Thanks," he said. "I'm sorry about that. You don't have to explain," Kevin said. "But I have to say, I'm pretty surprised. You never mentioned anything about playing piano. In all the time we've worked together, you never said a word about music." "Because I'm not a musician anymore," James said. "I stopped playing a long time ago." "Why?" It was such a simple question, but it felt like a knife cutting through James's chest. Why did he stop? Because he failed. Because someone told him he was not good enough. Because he was a coward who could not handle rejection. "I just did," James said. "Sometimes things change. People change." Kevin did not push any further. He was a good friend that way. He could tell when someone needed space. The party continued around them. People were dancing now. The music was loud and fast. Couples were laughing and spinning around the room. But James just stood there, stuck in his own world. He started thinking about his mother. She passed away 3 years ago, and James never got to say goodbye properly. He had been too wrapped up in his own depression to visit her in the hospital. By the time he arrived, she was already gone. The last conversation they ever had was about the piano. "James," she had said on the phone, her voice weak and tired. "Promise me something." "Anything, Mom." "Promise me you'll play again someday. I know what happened hurt you. I know you're scared. But the music inside you is too beautiful to stay silent forever. Don't let one failure define your whole life." James had promised her. He had said yes, even though he did not mean it. He just wanted to make her happy. And then she was gone, and the promise became just another regret to add to the pile. Standing in that party, looking at the dusty piano, James felt something breaking inside him. All the walls he had built over the years were starting to crack. All the lies he told himself about being happy with his quiet life were starting to fall apart. The truth was, he missed it. He missed the piano so much it hurt. He missed the way the music made him feel alive. He missed the connection between his fingers and the keys, the way the sounds flowed through him like water. He missed being the person he was before that terrible audition changed everything. James put down his water glass. He straightened his back. Something shifted in his expression, something Kevin noticed right away. "James?" Kevin said. "What are you doing?" James did not answer. He started walking. His legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. But he kept moving, one step at a time, toward the corner of the room where the piano sat waiting. People noticed him walking. Some moved out of his way. Others watched with curiosity. The blonde woman, Lisa, saw him approaching the piano and let out an excited squeal. "Oh my God. He's going to play. Everyone, he's going to play." The music was turned down. Conversation stopped. All eyes in the room turned to James as he stood in front of the old, upright piano. His hands were trembling. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. 8 years. It had been 8 years since he last touched a piano. What if he had forgotten everything? What if he made a fool of himself in front of all these strangers? But then James thought about his mother. He thought about the promise he made to her. And he thought about how tired he was of running away from who he really was. He sat down on the bench. The wood was hard under him. The keys were yellowed with age and covered in a thin layer of dust. But they were still beautiful. They were still full of possibility. James placed his fingers on the keys. The touch was familiar, like greeting an old friend he had not seen in years. 1,000 memories rushed through him at once. His mother's smile, his teacher's encouragement, the joy of creating something beautiful out of nothing. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was watching, waiting. James took a deep breath, and then, for the first time in 8 years, he began to play. The first note was soft and simple, just a single key pressed by a trembling finger. The sound floated through the quiet room like a small bird taking its first flight. It was nothing special, just one note. But to James, it felt like the whole world had shifted. He pressed another key, then another. A simple scale, the most basic thing any piano student learns. C, D, E, F, G, B. See his fingers move slowly, carefully, like a person learning to walk again after a long illness. Someone in the crowd snickered. "That's it?" A voice said. "Just a basic scale? I thought he was supposed to be good." James heard the comment, and his fingers stopped moving. The old fear came rushing back. The judge's voice echoed in his head. "You lack the mental strength." His hands started shaking harder. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he should stop now before he embarrassed himself even more. But then he felt something else. A warmth spreading through his chest. The keys under his fingers felt right. They felt like home. 8 years of silence, and here he was, finally touching the thing he loved most in the world. Was he really going to let one rude comment chase him away again? No, not this time. James closed his eyes and took a slow breath. He thought about his mother. He thought about the little boy he used to be, the one who sat at her old piano making beautiful sounds. That boy was still inside him somewhere. James just had to find him again. He started playing the scale again, but this time, something was different. His fingers moved a little faster. The notes connected to each other, flowing instead of stumbling. And then, without really planning to, James let the scale transform into something else. A melody. Soft and sad and beautiful. It was a piece by Debussy called Clair de Lune. James had played it hundreds of times when he was younger. It was one of his mother's favorites. She used to close her eyes and smile whenever he played it for her. At first, the music came out rough. James hit wrong notes. His timing was off. His fingers felt stiff and clumsy after so many years of not playing. But he did not stop. He pushed through the mistakes, searching for the music he knew was still inside him. And slowly, note by note, it started coming back. The room had gone completely silent. The people who had been laughing and talking were now standing still, their eyes fixed on James. Even Lisa, the drunk woman who had started all of this, was watching with her mouth slightly open. Kevin stood near the back of the room, his arms crossed over his chest. He could not believe what he was seeing. His quiet coworker, the boring guy who never talked about anything interesting, was creating the most beautiful music Kevin had ever heard. The melody grew stronger. James's fingers found their rhythm. The wrong notes became fewer and fewer. The stiffness in his hands melted away, replaced by a smoothness that came from years of practice and muscle memory that had never really disappeared. James was no longer thinking about the people watching him. He was no longer thinking about the judge who had destroyed his dream. He was not even thinking about himself. He was just playing. He was lost in the music, floating somewhere between the notes, feeling things he had not allowed himself to feel in 8 years. Tears started forming in his eyes, but he did not notice. The music was taking him to a different place. He was in his mother's living room again, a little boy sitting at an old piano. He could smell her cooking in the kitchen. He could hear humming along to whatever song he was playing. For a moment, just a moment, she was alive again. She was there with him. The middle section of Clair de Lune built up slowly, each phrase reaching higher than the last. James leaned into the keys, his body moving with the music. This was what he had been missing all these years. This feeling of being completely connected to something bigger than himself. This sense of purpose and meaning that nothing else in his life could provide. A woman standing near the piano started crying. She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed, but she could not stop the tears. The man next to her put his arm around her shoulder and pulled her close. Neither of them said a word. There were no words for what they were experiencing. The music filled every corner of the room. It went through the walls and the windows and into the cold night outside. It wrapped around every person at the party like a warm blanket. For those few minutes, there was no world outside this room. There was no past and no future. There was only the music and the man creating it. James felt something opening inside him. It was like a door that had been locked for years was finally swinging open. Behind that door was everything he had tried to bury. The pain, the disappointment, the loneliness, but also the joy, the passion, the love he felt for this strange and beautiful art. He let it all out through the keys. Every emotion he had bottled up came pouring out as music. The notes carried his story, his struggles, his hopes, his fears. And somehow, even though nobody in the room knew what James had been through, they felt it. They understood it in a way that words could never explain. The final part of Clair de Lune was gentle and quiet. The music slowed down, getting softer and softer. James played each note with care, like saying goodbye to an old friend. The last chord hung in the air for a long moment before fading into silence. James opened his eyes. His face was wet with tears. His hands were still resting on the keys, trembling but no longer from fear. He was trembling because something inside him had changed. Something had broken free. The room stayed silent for what felt like forever. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They were all still caught in the spell of what they had just witnessed. And then, from somewhere in the back of the room, someone started clapping. One person at first, then 2, then 10, then everyone. The applause exploded like thunder. People were cheering and whistling and wiping tears from their eyes. James sat at the piano, overwhelmed by the response. He did not know what to do. He did not know what to say. All he knew was that for the first time in 8 years, he felt alive. Really, truly alive. But something told him this was not over yet. The music inside him was awake now, and it wanted more. It had been sleeping for too long, and now that it was free, it was not ready to be quiet again. James looked down at the keys, and a small smile appeared on his face. Maybe, just maybe, this night was not going to be as terrible as he thought. The applause continued for a long time. James sat at the piano bench, not knowing what to do with himself. He had forgotten what this felt like. The warmth of appreciation, the connection with an audience, the strange and wonderful feeling of sharing something personal with strangers. People were moving closer to the piano now. They wanted to see him better. They wanted to be near the source of the beautiful music they had just heard. James looked at their faces and saw something that surprised him. They were not judging him. They were not waiting for him to fail. They were genuinely moved by what he had played. Kevin pushed through the crowd and stood next to the piano. His eyes were wide with disbelief. "James," he said, his voice shaking a little. "That was... I don't even have words. Why did you never tell me you could play like that?" James wiped the tears from his face with the back of his hand. "I told you. I stopped playing a long time ago. I thought that part of me was dead." "Dead?" Kevin shook his head. "Brother, that was the most alive thing I've ever seen. You have to keep playing. You can't stop now." The crowd seemed to agree. People started calling out requests. Someone wanted to hear more classical music. Someone else asked if James knew any popular songs. A young woman in the front asked him to play something happy because she had been sad all week. James looked at all these strangers who had suddenly become interested in him. An hour ago, nobody at this party even knew his name. Now they were gathered around him like he was some kind of celebrity. It was strange and overwhelming and a little bit scary. But it was also wonderful. Lisa, the drunk woman who had started everything, pushed her way to the front of the crowd. She looked different now. The silliness was gone from her face. Her eyes were red like she had been crying. "I'm sorry," she said to James. "I'm sorry I pushed you. I didn't know. I had no idea." James shook his head. "Don't apologize. If you hadn't pushed me, I never would have played. I've been running from this for 8 years. Maybe I needed someone to push me." Lisa smiled at him, a real smile this time, not the drunk grin from before. "Well then, you're welcome. Now please play something else. I think we all need to hear more." James turned back to the piano. His fingers were still tingling from the first piece. His heart was still beating fast. But it was a good kind of fast now. Not fear, excitement. The kind of excitement he used to feel before competitions when he was young. He thought about what to play next. Claire de Lune had been beautiful, but it was safe. It was a piece he had played 1,000 times. It was like reciting a poem he had memorized long ago. If he was really going to face his past tonight, he needed to do more than just repeat old songs. He needed to create something new. James placed his fingers on the keys again and closed his eyes. He did not think about any specific piece. He did not try to remember any songs. Instead, he just listened. He listened to the silence in the room. He listened to his own breathing. He listened to the beating of his heart. And then he started to play. The music that came out was nothing he had ever played before. It was not classical. It was not jazz. It was not any style that had a name. It was just music. Pure and raw and completely his own. The melody started soft and slow, like the beginning of a story. It wandered around the keys, searching for something. James did not know where it was going. He just followed it, letting his fingers lead the way. The people watching held their breath. They could tell something special was happening. This was not a performance anymore. This was something deeper. This was a man opening up his soul and letting everyone see what was inside. The music grew stronger. It picked up speed and intensity. James thought about all the years he had wasted being afraid. All the lonely nights in his small apartment. All the times he had walked past music stores with his head down. All the dreams he had given up on because one man told him he was not good enough. The anger came out through the keys. Not loud and violent, but strong and determined. The notes hammered home a message that James had been trying to tell himself for years, but never believed. You are not a failure. You are not weak. You are still the same person who loved music more than anything in the world. Then the melody changed again. The anger softened into something else. Sadness. James thought about his mother. He thought about the last time he saw her, lying in that hospital bed with tubes coming out of her arms. He thought about all the things he never got to say to her. All the songs he never got to play for her. The sadness poured out of him like rain. The notes fell from his fingers, each one carrying a piece of his grief. Some people in the crowd started crying again. They did not know why they were crying. They did not know James's story. But music has a way of speaking directly to the heart, and James's heart was speaking very clearly tonight. Kevin watched his friend with new eyes. He had worked with James for 3 years. They ate lunch together almost every day. Kevin thought he knew everything about this quiet, boring man. But he knew nothing. He had no idea that James was carrying so much pain inside him. He had no idea that behind that tired face was an artist, capable of creating such beauty. The improvisation went on for several minutes. James lost track of time completely. He was not at a party anymore. He was not surrounded by strangers. He was somewhere else entirely. A place where music was the only language and feelings were the only truth. Finally, the melody began to slow down. The intensity faded into something peaceful and calm. It was like watching a storm pass and seeing the sun come out again. The last few notes were gentle and hopeful, suggesting that maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. James played the final chord and let it ring until it faded into silence. Then he opened his eyes and looked at the people around him. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence was so complete that James could hear his own heartbeat again, and then something happened that James did not expect. A man in the back of the room started clapping, but it was not the excited applause from before. It was slow and respectful, like what you might hear at the end of a symphony. Others joined in, one by one, until the whole room was filled with this strange, solemn applause. James did not know it yet, but what he had just played was the beginning of something much bigger. The music inside him was fully awake now, and it was hungry for more. The most intense piano moment of the night was still to come. Something had shifted in the room. The party atmosphere was completely gone now. Nobody was talking about drinks or dancing or any of the normal things people talk about at parties. Everyone was focused on James and the old piano in the corner. James sat still on the bench, trying to understand what had just happened. The improvisation had taken everything out of him. He felt empty, but in a good way, like a bottle that had been filled with dirty water for years and was finally being cleaned out. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. They were shaking from the effort of playing, from the emotion that had poured through them. James looked at his fingers like they belonged to someone else. These hands had betrayed him at the audition 8 years ago. These hands had frozen when he needed them most. But tonight, they had come back to life. The crowd was still gathered around him, waiting to see what would happen next. Some people had tears running down their faces. Others just stared with wide eyes, like they had witnessed something they could not explain. A man stepped forward from the crowd. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with gray hair and a neat suit. His eyes were red from crying, and he was holding a handkerchief in his hand. "Young man," the older man said, his voice rough with emotion. "That was remarkable. Truly remarkable. May I ask where you studied?" James looked at him. "I was supposed to study at Juilliard. I didn't get in." The older man's eyebrows went up in surprise. "Juilliard? You auditioned for Juilliard?" "Yes, 8 years ago. I failed the audition." "Failed?" The older man shook his head slowly. "I find that very hard to believe. What you just played showed more talent and emotion than most professional pianists I've heard in my lifetime." James felt a lump forming in his throat. The audition didn't go well. I froze up. I couldn't finish my piece. One of the judges said I lacked the mental strength to perform at a high level. The older man's face changed. A look of understanding crossed his features, mixed with something that might have been anger. One bad audition. One moment of nerves. And you stopped playing because of that? It wasn't just the audition, James said quietly. It was everything. The pressure. The expectations. The feeling that I wasn't good enough. After that day, I couldn't touch a piano without hearing that judge's voice in my head. The older man was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and put his hand on James's shoulder. "Let me tell you something. I've been a music teacher for 40 years. I've seen hundreds of students come and go. Some of them had perfect technique. Some of them could play the most difficult pieces without making a single mistake. But very few of them have what you have. What do I have?" James asked. "Soul," the older man said simply. "You don't just play the notes. You feel them. You make other people feel them. That is something that cannot be taught. It's a gift. And it breaks my heart to know that you've been hiding this gift for 8 years because one person made you feel small." James did not know what to say. He had spent so long believing he was a failure that he did not know how to accept these words. Part of him wanted to believe the older man, but another part, the part that still remembered the cold audition room and the judge's cruel voice, refused to let go of the shame. "Play something else?" the older man said. "Please, I want to hear more." The crowd echoed his request. Voices called out from all directions, asking James to continue. The energy in the room had changed again. It was no longer curiosity or entertainment. It was something deeper. These people needed to hear him play. They needed it in a way that none of them fully understood. James turned back to the piano. He thought about what the older man had said. Soul. Was that really what he had? All these years, he had focused on what he lacked. The mental strength. The ability to handle pressure. The perfect technique that never failed. But maybe he had been looking at things wrong. Maybe the thing he had was more important than the things he was missing. He placed his fingers on the keys and began to play again. But this time, something was different. This time, he was not holding anything back. The music that came out was fierce and powerful. It was nothing like the soft melodies from before. This was a storm. This was a fire. This was every angry thought James had ever had. Every scream he had swallowed. Every punch he had never thrown. His fingers flew across the keys with a speed and force that surprised even him. The piano groaned under the intensity. Notes piled on top of each other, crashing together like waves against rocks. The sound filled the room and shook the walls. People stepped back, startled by the sudden change. This was not beautiful in the traditional sense. It was raw and violent and uncomfortable, but it was also honest. It was the most honest thing James had ever played. He thought about the judge who had destroyed his dream. He thought about the years of depression and loneliness. He thought about all the people who had looked at him with pity or disappointment. He thought about his own weakness, his own cowardice, his own inability to fight for what he loved. The anger built and built, the music getting louder and more intense with every second. James was sweating now. His arms were burning from the effort. But he did not stop. He could not stop. The music had taken control, and it was not finished yet. Some people covered their ears. Others just stood there, frozen, unable to look away. Kevin watched his friend with something close to fear. He had never seen James like this. He had never seen anyone like this. And then, just when it seemed like the music could not get any more intense, James did something unexpected. He slammed his hands down on the keys one final time, creating a massive chord that echoed through the room, like thunder, and then silence. Complete and total silence. James sat there, breathing hard, his head hanging low. His whole body was shaking. He had given everything he had. There was nothing left inside him. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Nobody dared to speak. Nobody dared to move. They were all still processing what they had just witnessed. The older man with the gray hair stepped forward again. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling. But when he spoke, his voice was steady. "That," he said quietly, "was the most intense piano playing I have ever heard in my entire life. You have just proved that the judge at Juilliard was a fool. Whatever he thought he saw in you, he was completely wrong. James looked up at the older man. Tears were streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you." But the night was not over yet. James could feel it in his bones. The music inside him was not satisfied. It wanted one more chance to speak. One more moment to shine, and that moment was coming. The people at the party had been transformed. An hour ago, they were strangers drinking and dancing and making small talk. Now they stood together in silence, united by something none of them could explain. They had come to have fun. They had found something much more meaningful. Lisa, the woman who had started everything, was standing near the window. Her makeup was ruined from crying. She kept looking at James like he was some kind of miracle. Just a few hours ago, she had thought he was just another boring guy at a boring party. Now she understood that she had been completely wrong about him. She walked over to the older man with the gray hair. "Who are you?" she asked. "How do you know so much about music?" The older man smiled sadly. "My name is Robert. I was a piano teacher for many years. Now I am retired. I came to this party because the host is my niece." He looked at James, who was still sitting at the piano bench with his head down. "I never expected to hear anything like this tonight. This young man has a rare gift. It is tragic that he has been hiding it for so long." More people gathered around Robert, wanting to hear what he had to say. He was clearly someone who understood music in a way they did not. They wanted him to explain what they had just experienced. "What makes him so special?" a young man asked. "I mean, I know it sounded amazing, but I don't really understand music. What is it about his playing that's different?" Robert thought for a moment before answering. "Most pianists play with their fingers. The great ones play with their hearts. But what this young man does is even more rare. He plays with his entire soul. When he touches those keys, he is not just making sounds. He's telling you his story, his pain, his joy, his fears, his hopes. Everything he has ever felt comes out through the music." The young man nodded slowly, even though he was not sure he fully understood. Kevin had made his way to the front of the crowd. He stood next to the piano, watching James with worried eyes. His friend looked exhausted. The two pieces he had played, especially the second one, had clearly taken a huge toll on him. "James," Kevin said softly, "are you okay? Do you need some water? Maybe you should take a break." James lifted his head and looked at Kevin. His eyes were red and swollen from crying. His face was pale and wet with sweat. But there was something else in his expression too. Something Kevin had never seen before. A kind of light. A kind of peace. "I'm okay," James said. His voice was hoarse but steady. "I'm more than okay. For the first time in 8 years, I actually feel like myself." Kevin did not know what to say to that. He just stood there, looking at his friend like he was seeing him for the first time. The room slowly started coming back to life. People began talking in whispered voices, sharing what they had felt during James's performance. Some were describing it as beautiful. Others called it powerful. A few said it was the most emotional experience of their lives. A woman in a red dress approached the piano. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a gentle face. She had been crying during both pieces, and her eyes were still wet. "Excuse me," she said to James. "I just wanted to thank you." James looked at her, confused. "Thank me? For what?" The woman took a deep breath. "My mother passed away 3 months ago. She was a piano player too. Not professional, just someone who loved to play for her family. When she was alive, I never really appreciated her music. I was always too busy with my own life to sit and listen." She paused to wipe her eyes. "When you played that first piece, the slow and beautiful one, I felt like she was in the room with me. I could almost hear her playing. I could almost feel her presence. For those few minutes, I got to say goodbye to her in a way I never could before. James felt tears forming in his own eyes again. "I'm so sorry about your mother." The woman shook her head. "Don't be sorry. Be proud. What you did tonight was a gift. Not just to me, but to everyone in this room. Music like that can heal people. It can connect us to things we have lost. It can help us feel things we are afraid to feel." She reached out and touched James's hand gently. "Please don't ever stop playing again. The world needs people like you." Then she walked away, disappearing into the crowd. James sat there, stunned by her words. He had spent 8 years believing that his failure at Juilliard meant he had nothing to offer the world. He had convinced himself that if he could not be a professional pianist, there was no point in playing at all. But this woman had shown him something different. Music was not about success or failure. It was not about impressing judges or winning competitions. It was about connection. It was about touching people's hearts and making them feel less alone in the world. More people came forward to share their reactions. A man told James that the angry piece had helped him process feelings about his divorce that he had been bottling up for months. A teenage girl said that the music had inspired her to keep pursuing her own dreams of becoming a singer. An elderly woman simply hugged James without saying anything, her tears speaking louder than words ever could. Each person had their own story. Each person had been touched in their own unique way. James had not just played music tonight. He had created moments of healing for people he had never met. Kevin stood back and watched all of this with amazement. He brought James to this party, hoping to help his lonely friend make some connections. He had no idea that James would end up connecting with an entire room full of people through his music. The older man, Robert, approached James one more time. "Young man, I hope you understand now what you are capable of. What happened tonight was not an accident. It was destiny. You were meant to share your gift with the world." James looked at him. "But what about the fear? What if I freeze up again like I did at the audition? What if I can't handle the pressure?" Robert smiled gently. "Fear never goes away completely. Every performer feels it before they go on stage. The difference is what you do with that fear. Tonight, you took your fear and turned it into something beautiful. That takes courage. Real courage." James thought about those words. So long, he believed that courage meant not being afraid. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe courage meant being afraid and doing the thing anyway. The night was getting late, but nobody wanted to leave. They all wanted to stay near the piano, near the man who had made them feel so much. The party had become something else entirely. It had become a shared experience that none of them would ever forget. And somewhere deep inside James, a final piece of music was forming. The most important piece of the night. The one that would change everything. The clock on the wall showed 2 in the morning, but nobody seemed to care about the time. The party had transformed into something sacred, and people were afraid to break the spell by leaving. They stood around the room in small groups, talking quietly, stealing glances at James and the piano. James had been sitting on the bench for almost an hour, not playing, just thinking. His body was tired, more tired than he had ever been. But his mind was alive with thoughts and memories and emotions that he had kept locked away for so long. He thought about his childhood. The first time he touched a piano. The joy on his mother's face when she realized her son had a gift. The long hours of practice that never felt like work because he loved it so much. Music had been his whole world back then. It had given him purpose and identity, and a reason to get up every morning. Then he thought about the audition, the cold room, the judges with their blank faces. The moment his fingers stopped moving and his mind went blank, he remembered the walk back to his mother, the shame burning in his chest. He remembered her trying to comfort him, telling him everything would be okay. But it was not okay. Nothing was okay after that day. 8 years. He had wasted 8 years running from who he really was. 8 years of working a job he hated, living in an apartment he did not care about, going through the motions of a life that had no meaning. All because one man told him he was not good enough. But tonight, something had changed. The people at this party had shown him that he still had something valuable to offer. The music inside him was not dead. It had just been sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. James looked down at the piano keys. They were dusty and old, some of them slightly yellowed with age. But to him, they looked beautiful. They looked like freedom. Kevin walked over and sat down on the bench next to him. "Hey, how are you holding up?" James turned to his friend and smiled. It was the first real smile Kevin had ever seen on his face. "I'm good. Really good, actually. I feel like I've been carrying a heavy weight on my back for years, and tonight I finally put it down." Kevin nodded slowly. "I still can't believe you never told me about this. We've known each other for 3 years. I thought I knew you." "I didn't tell anyone," James said. "It was too painful to talk about. Easier to pretend it never happened. And now?" James thought about the question. "Now I think I'm ready to stop pretending. I don't know what that means exactly. Maybe I'll start playing again. Maybe I'll take lessons. Maybe I'll just play for myself at home. I'm not sure yet. But I know I can't go back to the way things were." Kevin put his hand on James's shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. That's what friends are for." The older man, Robert, had been standing nearby, listening to their conversation. He stepped forward with a serious expression on his face. "James," Robert said, "I have something I need to tell you. I was not entirely honest earlier when I introduced myself." James looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" Robert took a deep breath. "I said I was a retired piano teacher. That is true. But I did not tell you where I taught." He paused, his eyes locked on James's face. "I taught at Juilliard. For 32 years, I was a professor at the very school that rejected you." The room seemed to freeze. James stared at Robert, unable to speak. Kevin's mouth fell open in surprise. "I know the judges who were at your audition," Robert continued. "I know the man who told you that you lacked mental strength. His name was Professor Harrison. He was known for being cruel to students. Many talented young musicians gave up their dreams because of him." James felt like the ground was shifting under his feet. "Why are you telling me this?" Robert's eyes were filled with sadness and regret. "Because I want you to understand something. Professor Harrison was wrong about you. He was wrong about many people. His opinion was not the truth. It was just one man's judgment, and that man was often more interested in tearing people down than building them up." The room was completely silent. Everyone was listening to this conversation, understanding that something important was happening. "I have watched you play tonight," Robert said. "I have seen your technique, your emotion, your ability to connect with an audience. If you had auditioned in front of me instead of Professor Harrison, I would have accepted you without hesitation. You would have studied at Juilliard. You would have become the pianist you were always meant to be." James felt tears streaming down his face again. All these years, he had believed that the rejection was his fault, that he was not talented enough, not strong enough, not good enough. But now a professor from Juilliard was telling him the opposite. "It's too late now," James whispered. "I'm 30 years old. The dream is gone." Robert shook his head firmly. "It is never too late. Some of the greatest musicians did not find their success until later in life. What matters is not when you start. What matters is that you start at all." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "This is my number. When you are ready, call me. I may be retired, but I still have connections in the music world. I would be honored to help you find your way back." James took the card with trembling hands. He looked at it for a long moment, then looked up at Robert. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Robert smiled gently. "Because I have spent my whole life around music and musicians. I know real talent when I see it. And I know that the world would be a poorer place if you never played again." The crowd had gathered closer, drawn by the emotion of the moment. They could all sense that something was building toward a climax. The air in the room felt charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. James looked at the piano one more time. He had already played twice tonight. He had poured out his sadness and his anger. But there was still one more thing he needed to say through the music. He needed to say goodbye to the past and hello to the future. He turned to the crowd and spoke for the first time directly to all of them. "I want to play one more piece. This one is for my mother. She believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. She never gave up hope that I would play again, even when I had given up hope completely. I made her a promise before she died, and tonight, I'm finally going to keep it." He turned back to the piano, placed his fingers on the keys, and closed his eyes, and then he began to play the most important piece of the night. The music started soft, so soft that people had to hold their breath to hear it. It was like the first light of morning, gentle and full of promise. James kept his eyes closed, letting his fingers find their own way across the key's dot. This was not a piece anyone had written before. This was something new, something that existed only in this moment, in this room for these people. It was James's final gift to the night. The melody told a story. It started with a simple theme, innocent and pure, like a child discovering the world for the first time. People who listened could almost see a little boy sitting at an old piano, his small fingers pressing keys just to hear the sounds they made. Then the music grew, becoming more complex and beautiful. It was the sound of dreams taking shape. The sound of a young man working towards something bigger than himself. The notes climbed higher and higher, full of hope and ambition and love. But then something changed. The melody stumbled. Wrong notes crept in, not by accident, but on purpose. The music became confused and painful. It was the sound of failure, the sound of rejection, the sound of a dream breaking into pieces. People in the room felt their hearts tighten. They could hear the story James was telling. They could feel his pain as if it were their own. Some closed their eyes. Others wiped away tears that had started falling without warning. The painful part of the music went on for a long time. It wandered through darkness, lost and alone. Sometimes it would find a hint of melody, a glimpse of the beautiful theme from before, but then it would slip away again into confusion and sadness. This was the story of the past 8 years. The lonely apartments, the meaningless jobs, the empty days and emptier nights. James poured all of it into the music, holding nothing back. Kevin was crying openly now. He finally understood why his friend had always seemed so sad, even when he was smiling. He understood the weight James had been carrying all this time, and he felt grateful that he was here tonight to witness. James finally letting it go. Lisa had her hands pressed against her mouth. She was thinking about how close she had come to missing this moment. If she had not been drunk, if she had not pushed James toward the piano, none of this would be happening. It was strange how small choices could lead to such big consequences. The woman in the red dress, the one who had lost her mother, was holding hands with a stranger next to her. They did not know each other, but in this moment, they were connected. The music had made them a family. Robert, the retired professor, stood completely still. His experienced ears were hearing things that others could not. He was hearing a master at work. He was hearing the birth of something rare and precious. And then, slowly, the music began to change again. The darkness started to lift. The confused wandering found direction. The melody from the beginning, the innocent, hopeful theme, started to return. But it was different now. It had been transformed by everything it had gone through. The music built and built, growing stronger with every note. It was the sound of someone finding their way back from the edge. The sound of courage. The sound of choosing to live again after giving up for so long. James pressed harder on the keys, his whole body moving with the music. His fingers flew across the piano like they had wings. The sound filled the room, shaking the walls, vibrating in people's chests. This was the climax. This was what the whole night had been building toward. The music reached a peak of intensity that seemed almost impossible. Notes crashed together like waves in a storm. The piano groaned under the force of James's playing. It felt like the whole house might shake apart. And then, in one glorious moment, everything came together. The painful themes and the hopeful themes merged into one magnificent harmony. The music soared above all the sadness and fear and doubt. It was the sound of healing, the sound of acceptance, the sound of a man finally making peace with his past. James held that final chord, letting it ring through the room. The sound seemed to last forever, hanging in the air like a blessing. Then, slowly it faded away, leaving behind a silence so complete that it felt sacred. James sat at the piano, breathing heavily, his head bowed. He had given everything he had. There was nothing left inside him except a feeling of deep, profound peace. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room was frozen in time, still caught in the spell of what they had just witnessed. Then, starting softly and building quickly, the applause began. It was not the polite clapping you hear at most performances. It was something much more powerful. People were cheering and crying and hugging each other. Some were standing on their feet, their hands coming together again and again. James finally lifted his head and looked at the crowd. He saw Lisa wiping her eyes. He saw Kevin with the biggest smile he had ever seen. He saw the woman in the red dress blowing him a kiss. He saw Robert nodding slowly, his old face full of respect and admiration. And for the first time in 8 years, James felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Robert walked to the piano and put his hand on James's shoulder. That was beyond anything I have heard in my entire career. You have found yourself again. Now promise me you will never hide this gift again. James looked up at him with clear eyes. I promise. The party slowly came back to life after that, but nothing was the same. People talked differently, laughed differently, connected differently. Something special had happened in that room, and everyone knew it. Kevin drove James home as the sun was starting to rise. They sat in comfortable silence for most of the drive, both of them processing the incredible night they had just experienced. So what happens now? Kevin finally asked. James looked out the window at the pink and orange sky. I'm not sure. But tomorrow, I'm going to buy a piano. And then I'm going to call Robert. And then I'm going to start playing again. Really playing. Every single day. Kevin smiled. And after that? James thought about it for a moment. Then he smiled too. After that, we'll see. But for the first time in a very long time, I'm actually excited to find out. When James got home, he did not go to sleep. He sat by his window and watched the sun rise over the city. He thought about his mother and the promise he had finally kept. He thought about the strangers who had become friends through the power of music. He thought about the dusty piano that had changed his life, and he thought about how strange it was that what started as a basic tune had become the most intense piano moment of the night. And possibly the most important moment of his entire life. Sometimes, the things we run from are the things we need most. Sometimes our greatest failures lead us to our greatest victories. And sometimes, all it takes is one night, one push, one moment of courage to find our way back to who we were always meant to be. James smiled as the sunlight filled his room. He was finally ready to start living again.